We're going to talk adventure.
Yes.
But first, I would just like a brief introduction. Tell us briefly about yourselves, and I'll take it from there.
Thank you, Mpumi. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for joining our session, and we appreciate your attendance. Highly appreciated. My name is Sibusiso Vilane. People know me as a mountaineer, but I prefer to call myself an adventurer because I do pretty much everything that has to do with adventure. I was born in Shongwe Mission at Chapis Reef, and when I was 4 years old, my parents separated, so my mother took me straight to the Kingdom of Swaziland because she thought that would be a better place or country to bring 2 children up. And I found myself not in school when I needed to be at school at the age of 8, but at that time I had remarkably done well looking after goats and later to cattle. Then when I was 10 years old, I only got to sit in a classroom because my stepdad gave me the opportunity to get education. And I appreciated that by being the best I can be. So what I'm saying is when I was, before the age of 10 or before I go to school, most people that would have seen me then would have surely said, what a poor kid, he will amount to nothing. But at the back of my mind, I knew that if it was to be the way I wanted it to be in my life, it was all in my hands. So when I got the opportunity to go to school, I took it and make it work, not for my stepdad or for my mother, but for myself, because I knew that that is how I was going to change my life or shape my life to what I wanted it to be. So straight from high school, I never went to college, I never went to university. I went straight to a working environment, realizing that it was so tough to even get that level of education through people helping you. So I was very focused on what I wanted to do with my life because I didn't like the childhood or the upbringing that I had. But as you will probably all know, if you walk out of school without any form of qualification, chances are that you have 0 opportunities. And that was the challenge I faced. As a result of it, for 2.5 years, I worked in a construction company, grafting, daily working for hours. And I somehow believed that there's something better for me, but I didn't really know what that was, which encouraged me to keep on trying. And in 1993, I found myself in a nature reserve in Swaziland. I worked there as a tourist officer and game ranger, and after that, then I went back to work in South Africa, and that is where my journey of climbing mountains began.
And
so
that is where I want to place my bookmarker before we get into the book, because at that point, do put a mental bookmarker on that story, and it's where I'm going to pick up from. Yeah. Walter, maybe my disclaimer would be, without getting into Eye of a Child, tell us briefly about yourself.
Well, it's very interesting picking up where Sibusiso is speaking about the child maybe without education not amounting to anything. Because what's interesting for me tonight is my history teachers in the audience. Warren Bowden and lives in Nelspruit, as is Nico Sonnefield, who was my cycling buddy when I was 15. And we never met each other for 50 years. But the point is this, is that I had a stepfather that said, you're so stupid, you'll never amount to anything. You can't spell, you're not this, you'll never speak any languages, blah, 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 blah. So also I picked up when you said your parents separated when you're 4, mine also separated. I think I was maybe 2 years old type of thing. And so there's certain similarities in the way our lives have moved, not the same. I haven't summited these peaks. But, I'm a white South African that grew up in the apartheid regime or through the apartheid regime. So I also share a lot of my feelings of the visceral stuff that happened and how I felt it right in the gut. And so I'm Walter Thornhill. I'm in front of you guys today, so everybody can get through it, and I think it's part of what Sibusiso is telling me about survival. There are no excuses, and you can invert from being the victim to something else.
The reason why I start and ask you to share a bit about yourselves, because it is so easy to read one's biography, but I find the biographies are so precise that they miss the corners which make out one's character. So just in this brief introduction, we've already found the common themes you talk about, but also the contradictions as well in two gentlemen that I would say grew up around the same time, even in different countries at some point. But I want to start about your journey, because as much as we have different experiences, we often meet people in our paths that give our stories a whole new meaning and change the trajectory of our lives.
True.
Which brings me to your friendship with Mr. John. And if you do not know John, this would be the time to let you know that the book is available today, so you will get into who John is and what a key role he played in your life.
Yes. I met John, I wouldn't say by chance, it had to happen because it was on a Saturday afternoon. I started working at 6 a.m. So you realize that in the late afternoon, surely everyone else would have wanted to be at home. But somehow I decided that I wasn't going to finish work and go straight away.
All right, I need to give the backdrop for someone who hasn't read the book. This is
Yes.
when you are working now in Swaziland at
Yes.
where I placed the bookmarker. We continue reading.
Yes, in the nature reserve. And John walks into the reception where I'd been serving. I'm sure most of people will have said, well, not another guest, I'm walking away, because there was somebody that was serving at the same time. But somehow I sort of stood at the corner there, and then a conversation between John and my working colleague went like, my friend, you work in such a beautiful game reserve. Those of you that come from the Lowveld, they know how beautiful the Barberton Mountain Range are. Malolocha Nature Reserve is just over the border, stretching towards Oshuk Border Gate, so it was that. Says it is such a pretty place, but it is so vast and so big that I didn't feel comfortable walking alone. Are there any groups of hikers that I can join on a weekend? And my work colleague said, rightly so, I'm sorry, say people that come and walk here, they come and walk with their own groups of friends. So I look at him and I realized that he really needed some help. Then he poses another question, which then prompted me to introduce myself to him. He says, do you perhaps know a young fellow from the neighboring community that I can then ask to accompany me? At that stage, I stood up and said, hello, sir, I'm Sibusiso, I'm one of the rangers here. If you really are serious about wanting to go on a hike, I would be happy to take you on a hike on a Saturday when I'm off duty. And he said, that would be very kind of you, my friend, to give me off your time, and I will take that offer. So that is when I met him, and that is what led to us taking our first walk. During our first walk, then he says to me, my friend, you were helping me today, and I was watching you when you were scrambling on small rocks, and I think you would have made a good climber. And as they say, that comment led to what it is today. The rest is history.
I've heard that story so many times, but I still love to hear it again. And I want to track back now when Walter spoke about being raised by a stepfather, when you spoke about being raised by your stepfather, who one could say was a positive influence in your life because he opened a door to many opportunities. We're going to get into Walter's book is also available today, and you can smile for a picture as you get an autograph and share that on social media. Walter, your book is written literally in the voice of younger Walter.
Yeah.
When I first read and realized that, my question was, how much of my childhood do I remember as accurately? Where and how did the book start?
Yeah, I've often been asked many times how I have this unbelievably clear memory. And I think, certainly for myself, it works between extreme pain and extreme pleasure. And all the bit in between I don't recall. But this pain, of belittlement and chastisement and alcoholic behavior and stuff, I can retell these stories as clearly as though they were yesterday. And I think it comes from that. It's something in the psyche of recall. The first educational editor that helped me, she went, how do you remember this stuff?
Yeah, because psychologists often argue that extreme pain, we block out those traumatic experiences, but you detail it in a way that one almost relives through that with you.
Yeah, and yet, having said that, there's certain things I couldn't write about. It took me for ages to finally get to the part, where my mother climbs into my bed and wanting sexual satisfaction, which sort of sounds a bit tricky to talk about right here. But there was another scene where the headline could have been "Boy Murders Mother" or "Mother Murders Boy," and in that instance, I couldn't get that far back because my sister said to me, I stood in the doorway, I saw it all, and she had the knife and was going to stab you. And I said, no, I was restraining her. And then, as I write in the book, maybe both versions were true. Maybe it started one way and morphed into something else. And I did try, because my memory couldn't go, my sister had one view, I had another. And so it ties into a bit what you're asking. Maybe the trauma was so deep that I did attempt to do a regression hypnosis to see, and I remember sort of hovering above, but I couldn't go further. So in that instance, the trauma locked down further memory.
So when the organizers of the event told me that I would be sitting in conversation with two different men, I had to find the similarities because I thought, now how do I tie in the conversation? And though the brief was adventure, I still wanted to go back to the people before the adventure because it may sound like a heavy read, Eye of a Child, but it is also, as you say, Walter, not a book of pity or feeling sorry for yourself.
There's no victim, it's inverted, it's inspirational.
What do you want the reader to take out of it?
Well, I think, the first thing they should take is that all our lives are not dissimilar. It's only a question of degree. So there's nothing unique in my story. You just take the whole of South Africa. It's full of all sorts of different types of trauma. And so what the reader should take from it is, firstly, the book hasn't been written as a victim. It's written inspirationally with hope and compassion. It took a long time to get there, but it's also human. And so the reader, and I share that I hit points of depression and really think about the dark side of stuff. But we move through the tunnel, and actually the book's not about me. It's about all of us, and it's about the people that were before. I give a lot of airtime to my mother because she was in an orphanage and one thing or another, so it's no good blaming and pointing, and that's a point Sibusiso mentioned to me only last night. He said, we cannot blame.
No.
Sibusiso, you might want to pick up with him because it's a point he made very clearly. We cannot blame those around us, all the circumstances, all the government, all this or that, that we have to take the initiative and move on. More or less your words, weren't they?
Yes, yes, I'll say that it started when I said, what do we do? Where do we go to try and inspire young people to live a life that has meaning, that has purpose? That's when then I said, well, I think my challenge with young people these days is they think that life will be smooth and it will be plain sailing. And then when it doesn't work that way, then they start blaming their mother, they're blaming the education system, they're blaming the government. And I said, no. They need to realize that it's about taking full responsibility of your life, whatever results you produce. So that's where I said, no, move away from the blame game because it's never going to get you anywhere. So if we can try and get that to young people, I believe then we'll have a better future.
Speaking of young people, you recently came back from, I'd say, maybe exaggerated, the umpteenth time of summiting Mount Kilimanjaro, but you have for the first time climbed with the youngest, to my knowledge, of all the people you climbed with, a 10-year-old Tshego
Kgatang.
His father is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Silo Hatang. But even that, you know, sometimes we take away people's credit by attributing it to the success of others. Having climbed that mountain myself, I'm shocked that a 10-year-old went all the way to the top. And the book, To the Top from Nowhere, may have been about your first Everest summit, but it is by no means anything to do with mountains either.
No.
Again, I'm going to tie that with what you're saying now with young people moving away from the blame and actually taking responsibility, because Tshego comes to mind when I think of a young person who persevered through a physical mountain, and I can only imagine the lessons that he'll take from that to conquer many mountains that he will come across in his life. Why do you climb?
It's a good question. Why do I climb? I think George Mallory said it very well. He said, because mountains are there. and then one climber said it this way, asked the same question. I sort of read that line and I fell in love with it, because every time I go on a mountain, I remember that. It was from Poland. He says, it is better to be on the mountain thinking about God than being in church thinking of mountains. So why do I climb? I climb now just to inspire and encourage others to realize that we all have a potential to conquer the mountains we face in our life. So that's where then To the Top goes to, because To the Top from nowhere is not about encouraging people to climb a mountain, as into a physical mountain. To the Top from nowhere challenges you that any mountain or any challenge in your life, I like it in Siswati because every challenge we call it a mountain. So it resonates well. But that mountain, which is your mountain, you can conquer it if you have identified with it first and you know how big it is, because that they will then prepare you with the team that you want. Going back to Tseho, he won't have gone up there alone. He realized it's Kilimanjaro. I've not climbed, but I know Sibusiso has done it and my dad has done it. Therefore, I will partner with them and go and climb it. So I climb just to inspire people. I climb to make people realize that in me, they can see themselves achieving whatever venture, whatever goal they're setting out for themselves to achieve, bearing in mind that it does not just happen. I mean, I went up to Kilimanjaro with you a few years ago. I did not carry you up that mountain, but I was there encouraging you and ushering you, saying, Mpumi, I know you can do this thing. And I have a picture of you sitting there, you're all covered up, nobody can see who is this one, and you're looking down, and I come to you and I say, you can still get up there. And then you get up, and you didn't want me to talk to you at that stage, but I did. So for me, that's what I do, just to make people, through me, see themselves achieving whatever the circumstances are.
I tell a very glamorized version of that, by the way. Meet me outside. It wasn't afterwards. Walter, speaking of mountains, then you decide to tell your story, which, you're right, is a story of many children, unfortunately. An untold story of many boy children of all races that is not easy to read because we are still uncomfortable with the truth that it still resonates today. And then you meet your own mountain, publishing. Talk us through that process.
Well, it is a mountain. I mean, I think just starting from the writing, but if you move past that, it's a minefield in itself, you know, and particularly if you go and self-publish, because you've got to learn what it is to typeset, to work with the typesetter, and then find out there are things called orphans that sit on the end of the line if you finish the sentence with an I, and of course, in that there's a growth. Just so the whole process from start to finish, when I look at it, from the inception, each facet was about growing. And it's growing beyond the book. The book's just the instrument.
Because you touched on the book, I'm just reminded of the poetry that we also find in the book.
Yes.
Is that you?
It's me.
Is that now Walter now, or had you started
Walter,
writing?
not walking up mountains, but doing almost a bit like in a different thing. It was Walter walking in the desert, in the Sahara Desert, on 2 different trips. And I wrote the first 2 verses, and then it was my sister that reminded me. She said, maybe you can complete your poem when you walk this time. You know, and so I always give the first verse just as a little taster of saying, when was it last that you felt, by the way, there's a lot of contradiction in this, the comfort of a stone or the heavy weight of your heart? When a man crosses your path on a donkey, content in his world, yet you must walk on. So that's the start of that poem, which sits at the end, which is called Desert Thoughts. And, you know, there are many facets to it, but I think it became a summation of the journey into manhood, particularly talking about the baggage we all carry, and sometimes it leaves us alone, and other times it bites us when we least expect it.
So I discovered I have I don't know if it's a condition. I love books. I love book festivals. I love celebrating books and readers. So every time I meet the author, the next time I read the book, I try to read it in their voice, and I know I'm not the only one. So, here we are. You've told the story, which is over 10 years ago. And disappointingly, I still don't find your book in the bookstores. Is this a choice? What was your approach to publishing and distributing?
It is definitely not my choice. I'd love a copy of To the Top from Nowhere to be in any of the bookstores. I published with a publisher, Artfrag Press from Cape Town, and when the book was published, it was all over the country. You wouldn't go to a bookstore and never find it, but it only lasted for a very short time. And when I went into a bookstore, as an author, you sort of go and like, I want to see where my book is. And I went and I looked everywhere on the section where my book should be. It wasn't there. And then eventually I went to ask to the person that was selling. I said, do you have a copy of To the Top from Nowhere? I didn't tell him I was the author of the book. And then he says, yes, I think I have one copy. He went and he looked, and it was just under the very, very bottom under many books. And then he picked it up, and I said, okay. And then I went to my publisher. I said, what's going on with this book? Why is it hidden somewhere, and then it's only a copy? And then my publisher said then to me, the sad reality of African or South African authors is that they are competing with the international authors. And sadly, we Africans or South Africans, we don't buy our own authors' books, and that's why. So that hit me very painfully, because I thought, how do then people tend to access or get my story, which I believe resonates well with Africans, and I couldn't change that. So I think that's the challenge any African author will face, really, that we don't buy our own books. I was very delighted when I saw the three of us, we were holding each other's copies, because we bought our books, which is great, and that's why you probably value what the Lowveld Book Festival is doing, just to showcase some of us who are from here, even though we've got people coming all over the country. As I met some people from KZN, Swaziland, and all of that. But it is that we need to be able to showcase that. But it wasn't a choice. It is so sad that it is happening that way. But I, as an author, can't change that.
Now, also, there's a popular saying that I'm uncomfortable with, and I heard it in one of the other conversations as well with the other authors at the gallery, that if you want to hide something from a black man, you put it in a book. These kind of events are changing it. But the sad reality is, in South Africa, it is still pretty much racially divided, whether small groups of people are trying to walk away from that and change that. I don't think we're going to be able to change it without facing the elephant in the room. As we sit here, the demographics speak to exactly what Sibusiso was just talking about. Yeah. I love the fact that you also chose to self-publish, because I think I asked the question to you, or you posed the question when we had 4 authors at the University of Mpumalanga once, and I wanted to know specifically if you had encountered the same challenges, because this might change our view on, is it a racial struggle or is it a South African struggle with regards to publishing and distributing bestsellers beyond 5,000 copies?
Yeah, I think the two facets to answering your question, because at that university dialogue, one of the authors did say, he made quite a sort of pointed comment which I felt uncomfortable with. He said, it's because we don't look like them, referring to exclusive books. And as it happens, I know the CEO. He used to be the CFO, and even though I know him, my book can't get into exclusive other than if I follow their procedure. And their procedure has to be, as best I remember it, in fact, the woman that runs it is a black lady. So, and you have to go through one of their 4 accepted publishers, but they, in turn, take another 6 to 8 months to approve your book. So there are a lot of hurdles, and only then, if they say they're comfortable, are you in, so to speak. It wouldn't be nice to be where you are, hidden in the bottom shelf, because, I mean, I know this is a gentleman that's climbed all these peaks.
Yeah.
So there was that facet, and of course, actually, even finding a publisher, that's a huge delay in time and time and time. So this industry is fraught with difficulties. It's not the simple thing of just getting your book there, and everyone's taking a little bit out of the pie along the way,
Yeah.
and the poor author is left quite bamboozled by the process.
So now we've seen with the world of social media, authors taking that responsibility and promoting their own books on social media. I'm yet to hear of any research into how effective or how that translates into sales. That, you know, because PR can be just hype, but that would be another conversation. So the importance of such events, which you touched on, so how far have you traveled, or are you willing to travel to promote the story? The question is to both.
Yeah, well, personally, after realizing that relying on bookstores will never get my book out there, and I must say beforehand that for me, even going back to what Walter is saying, I believe that we don't publish to make money. It would be great to make money, but personally, I want to publish a story so that it can be accessed by people that I don't get the chance to meet and interact and share my story with. So that's my main and first priority, that people are able to know who Sibusiso Vilane is and what he's doing and what inspires him to do things. And then if I make money, great. So as a result of that, I've gone on social media, on the social media platforms to say to people, I have the book, and if you want, I tell to people, I know for sure you'll never get a copy at any bookstore, but just let me know if you want copies. And I've been able to actually get, in fact now, I tweeted yesterday that I'm coming here, and then one person said, the next time you come to Johannesburg, bring 10 copies for me. So we are getting to that level where you realize it is your book, it's your story which you value what people get from it, and therefore go out there and just make it work and make it accessible to people.
And you, Walter?
Yeah, look, I think I'm on the same page, really. It's you have to take control of the destiny yourself, and maybe it ties into everything Sibusiso says about life generally, as these children are blaming that and that. You actually have to, you got to go and pound the street, and you pound it all the time, and you take every opportunity. And, you know, I met an author once, he said the best talk he ever did was to one person. Only one person arrived, he said it was the best talk. And I think that almost epitomizes, it's not that quick fix.
No.
You know, maybe it'll happen one day, and maybe we'll both be side by side, then it'll be great. And we'll put our arms around each other, and we say we finally did it.
Yeah.
You know, we climbed a different summit. But in the meanwhile, we'll keep pounding the streets together.
I've got about 10 minutes remaining, and I'd like to, at this point, open the floor and some questions. I'm going to, Chad, I did not check this with you, but I'm going to ask my assistant. She didn't know that she was my assistant as well. Sipose, to Spusiso's daughter, to come around with the microphone to 3-5 question max. If you have any questions or comment. I have learned not to give away books because the last author that I shared the stage with said, you told the whole story. There's don't need to buy the book. So I left out, and I hope there's enough suspense for you to be curious. This is Sibusiso Vilane, and if there are any questions, I'm going to ask her to come. There's one at the back. Jen, I know you have a question. There's one over there.
Microphone.
And, oh, is there an extra?
Yeah, he says he's got.
Oh, okay, so
she
just
can
get
go.
one from Chad, and then... All right, you can start right next to you. There's a... Was there a hand there? No, I imagined. Okay, come close. That side.
Is the microphone working there? Is it on or off? Yes? Oh, I see. That.
Yes, I was saying...
better.
Yeah. I was saying it will be best if you could follow self-publishing. Because with self-publishing, you can market, you can sell, you can translate the book into a movie, into various languages. You don't have to ask for a permission. Because I realized with publishers, I won't say it's a human abuse, something, maybe it's economic abuse. And then, number 2, I just want to ask the Honorable Sibusiso Vilane, what was your first experience when you reached the apex of Kilimanjaro? And what is the meaning? Because I'm always interested with this. What is the meaning of Kilimanjaro? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll start making a comment about the self-publishing recommendation or suggestion. You're very correct. I think at least Walter is already there. He's done that. I published with a publisher, but then through the years of trying to see how my book, the very same one, can work, still using the publisher, I realized that no, it ain't going to happen, and therefore I think that's the route, that's the journey that I'm going to take. My follow-up on this one will definitely have to be efforts by me publishing. Kilimanjaro, how was it like to stand on the summit of Kilimanjaro? I first climbed Kilimanjaro in 1999. This is the highest mountain in Africa. And when I went, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just driven by the fact that a friend, John again, says, I have a friend who's climbing Kilimanjaro with his 16-year-old son. I wasn't 16. John says, I'm not interested in going because I did it with the same friend in the 90s. Are you interested to go? But by that time, we'd already discussed or talked about this idea of me climbing Everest. So I thought, well, maybe that could be a good start. So I set off with 10 other South Africans. We go to climb Kilimanjaro. I think I'm young and I'm very athletic and I would run up the mountain. But when I get to the base of the mountain, I get told that first a person who was almost my dad was going to carry my bag, and I refused. Because I said, no, I came here prepared to carry my bags. So they explained to me at the end that if he does not carry your bag, his children won't have food. That's the only way he supports his family. He has to work for you. And now, anyway, looking embarrassed, I accepted this man taking my bag. But the challenge with that, though, is now I'm just me, not carrying anything, and I'm told to walk pole pole, which means slowly, slowly. Like, no, why am I walking slowly, slowly when I'm not carrying anything? So myself and my John's friend's son raced behind the climbing porters, and we got to the camp about 2-3 hours before the whole group came, and the next morning I was as sick as a dog. And I had everything that you don't want to experience or feel at high altitude. And that learned the lesson then that, on the mountain, you do everything the mountain way. And the mountain way is you slow down. So the next morning, I needed to be very disciplined. Forced myself to walk right at the back. And the guide was very surprised because that day he called me many times. He said, Sibusiso, please catch up, stay with the group. I didn't tell him I was sick because I knew then that if I tell him, he would send me back down the mountain. I didn't want to be walking down as an embarrassment. And I won't tell John that I couldn't even climb Kilimanjaro. And we are thinking Everest. If you can't climb Kilimanjaro, surely John would have said, no, then don't even think about Mount Everest. But anyway, to how the feeling was, after I recovered, I was able to start to go for the summit night. And we pushed very strongly and we summit just before the sun comes up. So we're standing on this highest point in Africa. And you're looking around, you can just see as far as the horizon where the sun will come up. And we just saw it rising slowly and slowly until it was just above that horizon. It was the most profound feeling and experience, but as I stood there watching that, I said, well, I would like to see the sunrise on the highest mountain in the world. So that day was a life-changing one for me in a small way, not as profoundly as Mount Everest. But yeah, that's how I felt. From there, I was inspired and encouraged to go and summit Mount Everest because of that experience on Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro's meaning, as into the name, well, I've tried many times with the Tanzanians and in books, and nobody seems to know what's the meaning around it. But now the summit of Kilimanjaro is called Uhuru Peak. So we know what Uhuru is. So that's the literal translation. Only that, the summit itself, the pinnacle, Freedom Peak. So that is meaning, but Kilimanjaro has never been found to mean anything. Thank you.
Okay, Sibusiso, a question. You've climbed all 7 peaks on 7 continents. You've walked to the North Pole, you've walked to the South Pole. What is next? Right? Because I know you keep pushing yourself to something. You always say, don't climb the mountain that you know you can climb. So
Yes.
what is the next mountain? And then for Walter, the question is, you achieved great heights in your cycling, and you cycled and became a Springbok, and then for many years you didn't cycle, and then you started cycling again. So why was that? And are you cycling differently now than you did when you were a youngster, with different motivation?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Now, what's next for me after having done all that I have done? I've looked at many projects that I've been invited into doing, and the last of which was obviously to try and challenge myself to climb Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen, which was earlier this year. I believe I did myself very proud, because without oxygen, I climbed to 8,000 meters. When my team of climbers that were with me started using oxygen at 6,000 meters, and they were still climbing stronger than they were doing. And these are ideas that I challenge myself with, because the sad reality of achieving amazing things, you stand on the summit of the mountain, it becomes a testimony of your ability, of what you can achieve, and therefore you don't sit back and say, I've done it, because you realize it is never a destination. And when you set a standard, like Madiba said to me when I met him, you realize that the only way you can do with a standard you've set is to better it, and therefore you need to find something that keeps you going. As we know, it is a journey. So I have got lots of projects in my head that I want. So what next is, I want to go back to the Himalayas and climb 2 mountains, and this I'm planning to do it next year, September and October. The 2 mountains will be an 8,000 meter peak in the Himalayas called Mount Manaslu, and then I will climb one mountain which I always say it is a mountain of my heart, because I looked at it walking past it to Everest, and I thought, I wouldn't mind climbing this one. Why do I go to Everest? It's a mountain called Amatablam, and I will do the 2 together in the one trip that I go. I'm looking between 40 days, I will be able to try and attempt the summit of the 2 of them. So I've got lots in my head that are up that way I challenge myself, because I'm the one person who knows how capable I am, and I believe in having no limits, really. I mean, I surprised many people this year when I said, I will run the 2 oceans and then go to Everest and then come and run Comrades, and comments were such that it cannot be done. 31st of March, I ran 2 oceans. On the 2nd of April, I went to the Himalayas. It was 2 months, not training or running, just climbing Everest. I got to 8,000 meters, had a bit of a lung infection, got back home on the 31st of May. On the 10th of June, I ran a 10.5-hour Comrades. Why? Because I knew I can do it. So these are things I just think and challenge myself with. Thanks.
And did Kilimanjaro in between all of those 3 times?
Yeah. Yes. And then straight from after Comrades, I ran the Comrades on the 10th, and then on the 16th of June, I left helping a girl with cerebral palsy to climb Kilimanjaro, and then I came after a week, went with the trek from Mbungela, and then afterwards I was back there with this young man. We summited on the 9th of August, which is Women's Month, and it was very profound to see this young man standing on the summit on that day. So it just never ends. But then again, it's what I said earlier, once the revelation is in front of you that we have no limits, then nobody will stop you.
We're wrapping it up, Walter. It's funny that you bump into your childhood cycling friend. How are you cycling differently now?
First of all, I had this big gap for ages, because I had a love-hate relationship with the sport because of how much you have to put in day after day, and in a way I felt it robbed me of my youth, but at the same time it was my anchor of survival, which I didn't understand at the time, and you understand as you're more of an adult. And so rapidly going forward, you know, I bumped into Nico, and we sort of slipped into, well, why don't we do this panorama tour, which is the local race, yeah? And it's nicknamed the toughest race in Tar because you climb double the distance to any other race. Certainly the Cape Argus or Cape Cycle Tour is half on the same miles per miles or kilometer per kilometer. So it wasn't even about the cycling. I think it was about a friendship. It was something else. It was beyond, and maybe all of the stuff, whether you're climbing a peak or riding your bicycle, it's more than the actual event itself. Mm. And I think that's what we're touching on all the time. And maybe very briefly trying to answer Jennifer's question, which I was thinking you should put me on the spot, but you know, what now? Where do you go to with the cycling type of thing? And in a way, Sibusiso's interest in the youth of today, it is true, that is the salvation. And it'd be wonderful to maybe try and think of something to do with him. I said to him, maybe you should ride a bicycle. And I'll teach you how to ride a bicycle. You teach me how to climb mountains. So half said in jest, you know, because actually I don't think I want to climb the mountains with him.
But I do want to ride a bicycle.
But I do want to teach you, you know, I want you to come ride with me, and we'll separate the muscles, and then you can ride with Nico, and, you know, maybe we'll ride them, you know, this. But to find, if we could find something to do maybe within the youth, and then I think, you know, the Quebecer scheme, and maybe we contact them. It's only imagination as to what we can possibly do, and, you know, we each have to look at where we are at our stage of life, and, you know, he's got more years than I have, but mine is that, but how we can use each day fully, and for the betterment of this, you know, this beautiful place we live in.
And I think that is safely where we'll park it for today. I certainly look forward to reading up about your adventures, the adventures of Walter and Sibusiso. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our gentlemen. Thank you.